So hello again. This is a Group 1 presentation about Philips outsourcing. Group 1 is Claire, Clement, Greta, Merve, Mosen, Nora, Peter, Stefan, and myself. And without further ado, we can start with question 1.
The key point here was why was Philips IP&S starting outsourcing its activities to a higher degree than they did before. And we believe the reason to act is that Philips itself gave it a completely new IP strategy to fully support the growth, competitiveness, and profitability that the company was seeking. And we identified out of the information shared with us 2 main drivers for the outsourcing activities. First of all, to manage the additional workload associated with a new IP strategy, meaning that they wanted to increase the efficiency of the organization, meaning keeping the headcount of about 430 FTE stable, but still be able to address the new and additional topics that were addressed to them as an organization. Secondly, there was a challenge to stabilize the cost of the IP operation. Outsourcing means you have additional costs, but the way you handle it, going from an ad hoc perspective into something that has a long-term, almost subscription nature with your partners, you might be able to get better deals financially to cover the workload that you're increasing by means of outsourcing. And last but not least, associated with the additional workload is also the ability to respond in terms of the time to respond to a request that was addressed by any of the business units. The second main driver is not only related to the workload per se, but also to the nature of the work, meaning that additional requirements for skills are associated with the new IP strategy. And here it's really about increasing effectiveness, having a higher expertise on core activities and focus on core skills to really make a difference in the strategic development process and the strategic process of managing the IP portfolio. Second, it's also about improving the competence to respond, meaning a higher service level in terms of the quality, but also adjusting the own organizational IP management to the needs of the new processes implemented within Philips as a whole. And last but not least, it's also about mitigating risk. The more complex the IP strategy becomes, the more competences they need to make available to the organization. So we believe that the reason to act is really linked to the additional workload and the additional requirements coming out of the new IP strategy. And with that, I hand over to the next presenter.
Okay, we are jumping to the question number 2, analyze the reasoning about outsourcing within an institutional economic framework. To institutional economic framework, we have 3 objectives: define property right, minimize transaction costs, and minimize agency costs. For the define property right, we have we have the right to control of the use of property. We have the right to manipulate the property. We have the right to appropriate any benefit from the property, and the last, the right to transfer, sell, or exclude others from the property. We suggest the property right for outsourcing. In outsourcing, property of IP right is stay in the hand of Philips IP&S standard. For minimize the transaction costs, we suggest the budgeting to avoid a surprise, to estimate in-house versus outsourced activity and deduce from this expected external spending. As we see in Philips' case, it sells about 24.8 billion euro in 2020. It has 35% of sales generated in growth geographies, and it's in the 2012, Philips was at the world top 50 globally recognized brands. To minimize agency costs, we must reduce our costs to controlling the agent. And in Philips' case, we see Philips has a worldwide organization. It has more than 100,000 employees in over 100 countries. and we must reduce the agency cost. And next.
The study talks about two forms of outsourcing: conventional outsourcing and virtual IP counsel. In conventional, the search is performed externally, and any decisions about potential patentability is performed externally, and advice is sought where necessary. And then the external IPC actually does the drafting. In the virtual IP counseling process, almost the entire process is outsourced to virtual IPC, and the filing itself is actually undertaken by Philips internal. So in conventional outsourcing, we study the patentability report, we draft the outsource the drafting process. We do it mostly for economic reasons. The decision is based on headcount or availability of headcount, and then the budget that might be available. There's a limited transaction cost associated with the conventional outsourcing, probably done on some sort of fixed fee, and then it's only for drafting and nothing for search. Whereas in the virtual IP counseling, the whole process, except patentability, search and filing costs, or the actual filing, the pushing the button on the filing, is handled by the virtual IP counsel. It establishes an agency principal relationship, and then the transactional costs are much higher with additional agency costs, but then the risk associated with the process has been transferred to the virtual IP counsel. Those risks could also be transferred back. The risk associated with going virtual could also be transferred back into the company because of mistakes that may be made by the virtual counsel, but it's still mistakes to the property owned by the Philips. Next.
In the question 4, it was the explanation of the role of the IT within an institutional economic framework. And we decided there is a general rule of the IT because it is used as a supporter for the work to ensure the efficient daily work, user-friendly interfaces that will make everything easier. And in general, there's a data access with different authorization levels that this ensure the data safety and confidentiality, but you have this problem of different authorizations. In conventional outsourcing, there's especially IT used as an exchange portal for the outside consults, but it's only used for sharing documents and written information, like a partner portal, it's called there. It's not an interactive exchange, just the documents. And in the case of virtual IP consults, the outside consults have access to the chosen IP management system. They have access to their own cases. They can work on them. These cases can be individual cases in the case of authorization, or it's an authorization at the cluster level. And the role is, the access is also role-based. If you're a counsel or a paralegal, you have different authorization levels, what you are allowed to do in this management system or not. So all around, it's a supporter for the work, and what is allowed to do is given by the kind of outsourcing. Next.
And finally, for question 5, we explain the role of quality checks within an institutional economic framework. So extended quality checks, like many other types of work, they're typically allocated in the beginning of the year. Some of the areas include content aspects, quality of the service, staffing and organization, relationship, costs, as well as speed. The result of the extended quality checks can include one of the or more of the following. So you can include the change of composition of team of the IP law firm. They can lead to more or less or even no orders to a particular IP counsel. Cooperation with the firm can be stopped entirely, or it can be continue as before or with just some minor changes. The report results is typically discussed with the IP firm with points of improvement and a deadline. And generally, if the performance is okay, every 2 years, 2 to 3 years is okay. Or when improvement is needed, then this can be more frequent. Finally, the quality of the quality check itself is important, and also it is also important to foster a friendly relation.
Well, that was it from our side. Thank you very much for your attention.